Day 3 Live Q&A. Theme, Development and Testing. A11y Camp 2021. We'd like to thank our gold sponsors Telstra and Intopia, our silver sponsors ANZ and Coles, and our bronze sponsor How2.
Welcome to A11y Camp, to our third day of our live Q&A. We will get started in just a minute. I can see some people joining now. So in the meantime, hang out with us and we'll kick off in just a sec. But in the meantime, maybe we'll do I always like to ask this, although for presenters, but feel free if you are not steeped in WCAG, feel free not to answer this, but what is your favourite WCAG success criteria? I could start on my favourite success criteria is probably 4.1.2 name, role, value. And that is probably because it covers what I'd say all manners of sins, because it's all about semantics and probably quite I think for both Russ's and Alicia's presentation that really did talk about semantics and the accessibility tree and that kind of thing. I find that I'm leaning on that criteria more and more when people screw up their components. So that's probably my favorite one. Anyone else like to share their favorite criteria? Steve?
I think my favorite is use of color, because I hardly ever have to use it. I mean, as in, like, when I'm checking stuff, I'm lucky enough that I never have to bring it up and say, oh, use of color. Yep. So it's my favorite because I hardly ever see it. Yes.
So you're like, done, dusted, gone. Alicia?
I'm going to go with keyboard. I think that once you teach people about how to make sure that things are keyboard accessible, it opens up a whole new world of just making things accessible by default pretty easily. Mm-hmm. So I think that when I approach accessibility and want to teach people about it, I jump to keyboard first.
Sounds great. I think I have a love-hate relationship with keyboard because it says things have to be keyboard accessible, but it doesn't say you have to use standard keyboard controls. You basically could use anything you like, and if you could use it with a keyboard, you're passed. But, that's a whole other question of WCAG versus usability. And Russ, for anyone who's tuned in, we are just letting a few people join us late. So I've asked, what is everyone's favourite WCAG success criteria? Presenters are answering, but feel free to pop your favourite ones in the chat. Over to you, Russ.
Well, I think you've both stolen my two favourites there. I love the keyboard one as well. But the other one is the time, which I can never remember which one it is. It's
timing adjustable.
Yeah. Because I'm finding out in the company I'm working with at the moment, we have a lot of functions which are time-based, and I've never had to experience that before in the real world, and have to convince developers that they have to change the way applications are built so that you can extend time out. So it's wonderful to actually have to see that in the real world.
Thank you, Ross. And Ani?
Yeah, probably for me, it's more along the lines of adaptability. So Android has a lot of challenges basically in the same space, and a lot of apps tend to lock things into portrait orientations, but definitely one thing that we like to aim for is making sure that different screen form factors and sizes and orientations work with the applications we like to sort of build out. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Ani. All right, I think we will get officially started. So welcome to our last live Q&A session for A11y Camp 2021. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am hosting this event from the lands of the Darug people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all joining us today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this event. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and also emerging. Well, it's a real delight to have you all join us here today. This is actually our 7th A11y Camp that we've run. So the last 2 years, of course, have been remote due to world circumstances. But we're hoping maybe next year we actually can again meet in person and see all you lovely people face to face. Today, I am joined by our presenters. So we released their presentations about 24 hours ago, and today's theme is actually more around development and testing. Today we have with us Russ Weekly, Alicia Evans, Steve Barnett, Sumner Davenport, Ashton Williams, and also Ani Vichadia. Unfortunately, Patrick is unable to join us. It's 3 a.m. in the morning for him over in the UK, so a bit of a tough call to get up, but he will take questions from you as well. So feel free to sign on to our Slack channel, or he has had his Twitter account reinstated as of about 24 hours ago, so you can also find him on Twitter. I also wanted to mention Alicia here probably needs to run off in about 40 minutes time because it's not such a friendly time for her either. So if you do have questions for Alicia, get them in early. We also have today Paul and Kirk who have joined us as our sign language interpreters, and also our captioners Isabella and Luke. So wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors. Once again, this year, we're able to bring A11y Camp to you free, and we can only do that due to our sponsors supporting us. So I'd like to shout out to our gold sponsors, Telstra and Intopia, our silver sponsors, ANZ and Coles, and our bronze sponsor, How2. So these organisations have actually supported us for many years, sponsoring A11y Camp. So I really want to acknowledge their trust and support for both this event and also for the accessibility and the inclusive design community as a whole. All right, so let's get on to how the Q&A is going to work. So you're actually able to ask questions through two forms. The first one is through the Q&A feature. So on your Zoom toolbar, you will find a Q&A button. And if you click on that Q&A button, it's going to open a Q&A box. So you can actually type your question into the Q&A box, and I will be monitoring those questions and picking them up and then directing them to our presenters. You can also upvote a particular question. So if you see someone who has a question, you're like, I'd love that one too. Do feel free to use the little sort of thumbs up button to let me know that this one is a burning question that a few of you would love to have answered. The second way, if you're more comfortable verbalizing your question, is via voice. So again, on your toolbar, you will have a little raise hand button. So if you click that button, it will come through to me and I know that you want to ask a question. I will then direct the question to you. You may be asked to unmute yourself. At the moment, being a webinar, you are all muted. So I can change that control. You can unmute yourself and then ask the question. Please let us know whether your question is directed at a particular presenter or if it's an open question for everyone, since we do have a bit of a theme here today in that sort of more development and testing space. I think that sort of covers our housekeeping. So now I'm going to ask each of our presenters just to give a short introduction of themselves while you're all thinking about your questions or starting to type them into the Q&A. So Steve, we might start with you.
Hello, my name's Steve. I am a digital accessibility analyst, which is like a front-end developer, but I also do lots of auditing. And I work at Xero in New Zealand.
Thank you. Over to you, Alicia.
Hi, I'm Alicia Evans. I live in California in the United States, and I work at a company called Knowbility over here. We do accessibility services, so we do audits and trainings and help desk and all of the things that you would expect from an accessibility company.
Lovely. Thank you, Alicia. Ani.
Good everyone, my name is Ani. I'm an engineer at ANZX. I basically on a day-to-day basis work with Android apps, and I've been working with Android apps and accessibility in the bank industry for it's like 6 or 7 years now.
Lovely. Thanks, Ani. Ashton.
Hi, I'm Ashton Williams. I'm a principal iOS developer at Seek. Like Ani, my career has kind of been focused on mobile, specifically iOS. So that's kind of my my main focus.
Thanks, Ashton. Sumner.
I'm sorry, I was so enthralled listening to everyone's introductions, I forgot to unmute my own mic. I apologize. I'm Sumner Davenport. I'm a specialist in web accessibility. And my passion is to educate businesses on the value of an accessible website and then work with web designers so they can learn how to do it.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Sumner. And Russ.
Hello everyone, Russ here from IAG. I'm the accessibility principal there. And like a lot of others, testing, wrangling, training, crying, usual.
Thank you very much, Russ. Fantastic. All right. So still waiting on a few questions to come in. So let me start. Actually, Steve popped a question in, which was in relation to what we were talking about before of what's your favorite success criteria? And I think this was a follow along from Russ's. Russ, could you tell us more about that, the timing stuff, the timing adjustable? Where do you put the setting to extend time and what would you call it?
Yeah. So ours was a much simpler problem. It was just trying to convince developers that it needed to happen, and then getting their head around this idea of 10 times, or how many options. So I think we opted. It was in one particular flow, and we opted for just multiple extends. So there was a button there, and it continually extended, which wasn't exactly a criteria, but passed the criteria anyway. But we did have to convince them to read the spec and go through all the options. And I think that they were quite boggled by the idea that a user might need a lot longer to fill in the form, especially the idea of needing 10 times the amount. So I'm sure all of us have had to have that of not only explaining it, but trying to get them to understand from a user perspective. So I'm sure all of us on the call do this where we put it in a user perspective. So I told them a story about a user with a head wand who would take much longer to go through a quote process or something like that. So thanks for the question.
Lovely, thank you. And we've had our first questioning come from Claire. This question is open to everyone. Claire says, so unfortunately, accessibility is still not taught to developers coming out of your boot camps or university degrees and the like. What would you recommend for new or junior developers who want to learn accessibility but are feeling overwhelmed? Anyone want to kick off on that one? Sumner, was that you putting your hand up? Over to you, Sumner.
I apologize, my mute button is difficult to find. This is a very common question, is I really want to understand, but there's so much to choose from, and how do I sort it out? I usually send people over to the w3.org website. And at w3.org/WAI, there is a link to Introduction to Web Accessibility. And it's an online WebEx course. It has wonderful chapters of different disabilities, how they access the web, how it pertains to WCAG, how to make it accessible, and most importantly, why. And there will be individuals that will show why this particular problem, why a blind person needs you to give description so that the screen reader can read it. And there's a blind person showing how they're accessing the web. What I hear from people a lot after they've accessed that course is they had no idea. It brought it home, so to speak, to actually visualize or to witness someone doing something. Things like people don't understand why reflow is important. Why can't you just throw content wherever you want on a web page? Why is it important to have it zoom and have the reflow that someone can read it? Having someone on a video that relies upon that makes a difference. And so that's where I tell people to start. Get an overview of as much as you possibly can. I think they say it takes between 20 and 30 hours if you just do it straight through, and you can get a certificate that you can brag about. And it gives a wonderful overview. And then I think from there, a person can then think, okay, now I want to know more about this, whatever this might be. and then find how to learn more about that particular part of the WCAG or accessibility.
Fantastic. Thank you much, Sumner. Two hands up, so I'll go there. Interestingly, this almost the same question came up when we were talking earlier this week as well around design. So I think it's an issue that we're all grappling with, whether, through all parts of the design development and really even the product management process as well, really for everyone who's involved with product management. But excuse me, Ani, I will pass over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. So I guess from the mobile accessibility side, it ends up being a little bit different. So WCAG is actually a very solid foundation, but we end up slightly competing against it with a little bit of mobile, just as things sort of catch up. Generally, I find that the biggest sort of developer resources out there when it comes to accessibility or just coding in general is actually the tutorials. And on Android, the developer.android website actually does provide a bunch of articles and information, as well as code labs for the Android accessibility side. So you can actually play around with the code and have a bit of a guided tour and see the sort of the effects of building up the accessibility framework. So that's definitely a really good, easy start. And just like with development in general, everything ends up being these little bits of building blocks. So you don't necessarily have to go full in with accessibility from the start. You can take a little things like doing content descriptions, which is basically accessibility descriptions, and then layer it on top of what you're learning as you're going along.
Thank you, Ani. Over to you, Alicia.
Okay, thank you. I love getting this question because it's so exciting when people are really committed to learning about accessibility and just want to know how. I think that the resource that Sumner recommended is the perfect place to start. I love recommending that. I haven't gone through it myself, but I've heard that people love it. I think that a really good place to start is to use semantically correct HTML. As you were saying, Sarah, that it'll do a lot of the work of getting that name role value good. So you're set on that. It also gets the keyboard things taken care of for the most part. And so you end up, the HTML5 ends up doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you, which is awesome. So if you're just getting started, that's what I recommend. I also think it's great to get involved in the accessibility community. There's an Ali Slack workspace that I only discovered after a year of trying to figure things out on my own. And it's really good to be able to ask questions when you have them. And yeah, just trying to work through problems, figuring out what resources there are out there. When I first started learning accessibility, I heard keyboard accessibility and just put tab index on everything. And then I learned, I know I should be hiding my face. But if there are people learning, be kind to yourself. Everybody does it at some point. I hope it wasn't just me. And there are accessibility patterns out there. There are people who've done the work of trying to figure out, how do you make an accordion accessible? How do you make a modal accessible? You can find those things in the RES specification. Inclusive components is a great resource for those kinds of things. And don't try to learn them right now because they're very advanced, but know where they are for when you need them. And so just understand that it's difficult and just do a little bit at a time.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I think, it's an interesting question, and I actually reflect on a conversation I had with my old university around this, where I spoke to someone who they did the 1 week of accessibility in the whole computer science course. And at this stage, actually, the lecturer I was talking to ended up as their head of department for computer science. And I was really surprised that when I spoke to her that, and I talked about how this fundamentally needed you needed to look at the entire curriculum. And like what we often talk about, you need to embed it into every single subject where it applies, as opposed to having 1 week or even, if it's a module, because occasionally we do have universities that have a module on accessibility or inclusive design. And for her, and I actually had a lot of respect for this lecturer. She was really awesome. it was total mind-blowing for her. She just didn't even have the knowledge around accessibility to even do that. And I think in the same way we talk about accessibility and, having to educate organizations in that, in, what it is and why it's important, I actually think for a lot of the universities and other teaching institutes, sometimes it still is lack of knowledge, even just, at that fundamental side. So I know there's the Teach Access Initiative, which tends to operate more out of the US. We don't see it so much here in Australia and New Zealand, but I think we need a lot more of that as well to really embed it into, curriculum across the board. Ashton, over to you.
Hi. Just thought I'd add a bit of a note about the iOS and Apple side to this question. So Apple provide a lot of really good free content on their developer website for accessibility, both videos, sample code, and like written guides. So accessibility is like a big thing for them on the iOS platform and their other platforms. And even if you're not coming from a native development perspective, a lot of that applies to just like the operating systems. So you can learn about how those will work for users viewing web content on iOS or macOS there as well. And I think if for people that are learning and are starting to learn maybe development but haven't focused on accessibility specifically yet, a lot of the best practices of development sort of lend themselves to the best practices for accessibility. Like for iOS, when you're building a native app, it's best practice to build a flexible layout that can adapt to different screen sizes and different like content lengths, which is really good for, supporting iPad and iPhone scale screen factors, and also localization. Like if you translate your app, text is going to be different lengths. But that also helps with accessibility if your text or content can scale in size for accessibility purposes. So I think at some point it all sort of starts to click, and you've probably got a bigger head start on knowing how to make things accessible than you realize.
That's fantastic advice. And I think both Ani and Ashton, you do mention some resources people can look at. And I think in that app space, it's often what I hear where there's a plethora of information on the web and people are blogging about it and that kind of thing all the time. Finding some of that information around native, whether it be Android or iOS, that I think there's a lot of people who want to do more, but they don't know where to find that information. And it is a lot harder to find. Fantastic. All right. So on to our next question. This one has come from Jonathan, and I think this will be open to everyone. What resources are available for making chatbots, so things sort of, mimicking SMS or text bots, communication accessible? Anyone want to start off on that one? Russ. Russ, you're on mute.
Complete failure. Sorry, everyone. I don't know about resources, but I've literally been just working with the team on this last week. So we had to work on a range of functionality. So there's a bunch of questions that you would need to ask. The first one is where focus goes when it hits the chatbot, and whether you're going to treat it like a true modal or not. So are you going to track keystrokes within it or allow them to go out? And we found there were two debates on that. And one would be, if it's a function where you want to lock them in it, you would treat it like, even if it doesn't look like a modal, like a semi-modal. But in some cases, the chatbot directs you to other pages, and you need actually pages there. So you might need to actually allow keystrokes to go out. So that was the very first one. The second one is it needs to have ARIA live, or it needs to be a space where screen readers are informed of changes. So if either an AI or a person responds to you, you need those information reported back to the screen reader. So that were the two biggest ones we found. There's a range of other ones as well, like if you're sending it through individual screens. So within our chatbot, if you clicked on something, it might go somewhere else, and making sure where you send the focus. The other one, of course, is when you leave the chatbot, when you send focus to, like any sort of modal, you want it to fire in a certain place and send it back to a place that's friendly, not thrown to the top of the page. So there's a range of common things that that we're finding that are really just best practices. I'm not sure that helps, but I'm sure other people could add to those.
Thank you very much, Russ. Looks like we might not have any further responses on that one. So moving to our next question, and this one is directed to Alicia. So in your talk, you mentioned field set legend for grouping things. What happens when it's not possible to use field set legend, in particular if the legend is not a direct child of the field set? And we know that kind of screws up the lovely association. You know, if there's some divs in between that field set legend and you just can't change that, what would be some of the options in that scenario?
I'm definitely willing to let this be a group answer. As we said, usually if there is a way to use semantic HTML, use it. If there's a way to just push it so that the legend is the first child, that's 100% what you want to do. If you can't do that, if there's absolutely no way to do that, there are ARIA solutions instead. So instead of doing a field set, you can do, I think it's role group, and then, getting some thumbs up. Okay. Role group on the container for those related fields. And then an ARIA labeled by with whatever text is serving as the legend visually, or ARIA label if they're, you should have something visual. So yes, an ARIA labeled by on that to talk about that association. There are other ways that you can use ARIA to associate text that explains what the association is per label. But again, if you can use HTML field set with the legend as the first child, do that. Otherwise, you can look into different ARIA solutions. And if anyone else would like to chime in, that doesn't need to be just for me.
Russ, I think that was your hand.
Yeah, beautiful answer. The only other option is you could use the ARIA describe by to point down to a heading. So the advantage of that is, as was asked, it can be anywhere in source order. With ARIA describe by, it doesn't have to be a direct child. So you could point to any heading within that tree and it would then become the accessible name for that component. But beautifully answered. Sorry, just to add to that.
Absolutely. I think one of the call outs, and don't quote me on this, but I know actually this came up in my organization Slack channel, I think just recently, something like this. And the only thing we had was if you start to mix like the HTML and the ARIA. So I think in this sense, we were thinking of, we're trying to patch an issue again, and it was a field set with an ARIA labeled by. I think that actually didn't work mixing the HTML and the ARIA together. I think we ended up having to suggest, even though we don't want to override semantics, we actually added the ARIA role attribute to sort of override it, and then the ARIA label, and that gave us a bit more of a robust outcome. So just be careful if you have to mix HTML and ARIA. Okay, sometimes it works, it loves each other, and sometimes it doesn't work so well. Don't quote me on that scenario, though. I'm going off memory and I can't be 100% sure, but the principle probably still holds. And both Alicia and Russ talked about the accessibility tree, and that's an awesome way to see how things are working or not working before you say whack out your screen reader as well. So we've got a question that's come through from Charissa. Looks like it's not directed at any particular person, so this one's open to all. Accessibility auditing involves manual testing, testing with various assistive technologies, and testing with users, especially with people with disability. There's also a place for automated testing. There are lots of automated testing tools available for websites, which we know capture about 30 to 40% of issues, but are still helpful. Are there any automated tools for native mobile apps, or it would be good to follow or are there any mobile app best practices? So maybe over to, Ani and or Ashton around that automated tools for native mobile apps. Ani.
Yeah, so in terms of automated tools, there's the Android Accessibility Scanner, which is actually coming out of Google. So what it allows you to do is basically capture screenshots and sort of analyze your UI and sort of check things as you're sort of developing across it. But another little tool is actually in Android Studio, when you're actually doing development, you will often get lint warnings, which are basically automated code warnings, which kind of indicate and help direct you to potential issues that come across. Outside of like these kind of tools, I know a bunch of companies are working on doing like screenshot-based testing. And whenever they do the screenshots, they try and use like AI or some other automated frameworks to actually scan your application and determine if it's accessibility compliant, or try and highlight any issues and sort of spit out a report as part of that. So that's probably the space to kind of look out for, especially more towards Android. But maybe one last thing I might add in is, especially in Android UI tests, you can actually integrate a bunch of accessibility checks into your UI tests. So if you're building them already as part of your application, it's a worthwhile, just a little addition to include, and it just helps give you that little bit of confidence automatically too.
Ani and Ashton.
Yeah, great answer, Ani. I'll just add to that. So Apple have, I guess, an equivalent tool, but I don't think it's nearly as good as part of Xcode, the Apple development environment, called the Accessibility Inspector. It lets you inspect Mac and iOS applications, like inspect the accessibility tree. It also has an audit function, but to be honest, I haven't been too pleased with it when I've used it myself. I think this is an area that still has a lot of room for improvement. And for the accessibility supporting code that you're writing, you can often test that using like typical testing methods like unit testing. And if you're doing like UI, user interface testing based on screenshots, or actually like simulating interaction with your app, you can often include some accessibility checks in there as well. But that's not going to find issues that you're not aware of. That will only help you not break stuff that you've deliberately put in. But I think the sort of exploratory, like find the unknown issues, I think that's an area that's lacking on native.
Thanks for that, Ashton. So I've just caught up with in chat when I did ask that question from Jonathan about what resources are available for making, and I must admit I ad-libbed a bit and said chatbot. Jonathan has clarified that he was actually asking about making SMS communication accessible. So if anyone has anything maybe to add on SMS communication being accessible, let me know. So Jonathan, that might be one that we might need a little bit more context on. SMS often comes with the operating system, and therefore it's your likes of your Googles and your Apples that generally make the SMS communication interface accessible. So if you've got a particular scenario in mind, maybe add that into the question area, and I'll keep an eye out for that. Just a quick reminder, Alicia is running off in 10 minutes, so unfortunately she's not able to stay to the end. So if you do have any questions for Alicia or around that sort of form accessibility and form labeling, get them in now. Okay, moving on to another question for Ashton. What are some of the easier accessibility features to support on iOS? And what are some of those harder ones to implement and maintain?
Sure, thanks for the question. I think I'm going to answer this in two ways. So if you're starting off building an application from scratch, I think dynamic type or larger text is really easy to support if you build your layouts flexible and follow Apple's best practices. That's kind of going to come for free most of the time. And with their newer UI frameworks as well, a lot of that's kind of, I guess, a lot easier to get right. You would need to go out of your way to break it oftentimes. For an existing application that maybe doesn't support dynamic type already, that can actually be pretty hard because you're going to have to touch a lot of UI. And if your application is very big, that means potentially touching every screen in your application, which can be a big change to make and test. There's a lot of risk in that. But I think maybe one of the easiest ones that even Apple say is really easy to support is smart invert colors on iOS, which is kind of like dark mode in that it won't just invert the screen. So if your device is in dark mode, it won't make all the blacks bright white. It'll keep them black, and it tries to be a little bit clever, I guess, in doing the contrast for you. But if you have content that shouldn't be inverted, like a photograph, it's just a really easy one line thing you need to set on that image to make it not get inverted, and that's kind of going to give you coverage on implementing that feature pretty easily.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ashton. Actually, Steve sent through a question before, and I'm going to pick this one up because it may be one that Alicia has some insight into based on your presentation. What do we do when we find people misusing ARIA? So the example Steve gave was, adding an ARIA label to a span or a div, something that's non-semantic, which can be a problem. But we see lots of misuse of ARIA in the wild. What do you do, maybe, Alicia, when you find people that are, sprinkling ARIA sort of a little bit willy-nilly?
I think, as I said earlier, I think it's just part of the process of learning accessibility. Once you learn that ARIA is out there, people go to it for everything. Like past Alicia putting tab indexes on everything that should be buttons. And I think it's just something that we're all learning as we go. I only learned that you shouldn't put ARIA on a div or a span fairly recently in the grand scheme of things. And so yeah, I just think it's one of those things you learn as you go. And as you spot those things, I spot them all the time. You just let people know kind of politely, like your intentions are good, your heart's in the right place. This isn't the way to do it. And here it is. This much easier solution is the way to do it. And I think that makes everyone a little bit happier in life.
Thanks, Alicia. Did anyone have anything to add to that? No? All good. All right. So, Sumner, you spoke about media accessibility, and in particular, you called out two media players that you would recommend people use, particularly, and you mentioned that they integrate well with WordPress sites. I was really excited to see you call out Able Player. Actually, I think it's one of the most richest players I have seen in accessibility and has so much integrated into it, like closed captions, the ability to switch over to audio description, and that sort of interactive transcript. If people are looking at other media players, particularly ones maybe that integrate well with WordPress, what should you be looking for in an accessible media player?
Great question. I personally like things that are simple. If I look at something that is pre-built, like the Able Player or a plugin, because I work predominantly in WordPress, I want it to be simple. I don't want to suddenly have to have a learning curve that takes me away from my progress. So if I'm looking at, when I started to look at the players that I talked about in my presentation, I wanted to find out what features they offered, how many disabilities would be covered by those features, how many more people now could access that video because of those features, and how easy is it for me to implement those features into the website. So I'm all about simple. When evaluating which one, whether it was the able player or the player, became my favorite, it was a matter of which one was easier for me to learn, not only for myself, but to explain it to someone else. And I like the option that a lot of times people in WordPress, their first quest is, I need a plugin for this. And you go to their website and they've got 100 and gosh knows how many plugins in there that they don't need. And it's bloated and it's slow. And it's almost like they got one plugin to do one thing, but now they had to add a second plugin to fix what the first one did wrong or too much of. It's like Alicia was mentioning by putting Aria where it didn't belong. It was kind of throwing in a fix. So my feeling with both the able player and the player is they don't have to be a plugin. If you understand HTML, you can actually, even if it's a WordPress site or a Drupal or any other platform, an Elementor or Divi, whatever, you can still use HTML and make it a very clean install and use all the tools. I also, when I'm looking for an accessible player or a product, is I want to know what kind of support is available for that. And I'm going to go to GitHub and I'm going to see how many people are contributing to this, how quickly are questions responded to. Are the questions creating solutions or are they creating more problems? So again, it really comes back to my world. I want simple. And if I find it difficult, I won't use it. So if that's my feeling about it, that means somebody else isn't going to use it either. I can't recommend something that I personally wouldn't use. And I have persons that work with me that have various disabilities. So if I find it difficult, do I want to hand it to someone else and make it difficult for them as well? Of course not. So that's my feeling. We start simple, then we look for how much can it offer me and how much can it expand the number of people that can now visit that website, watch that video, understand the content.
Thanks so much for that, Sumner. It's a great answer. I think also your comment around checking about like the accessibility of the media player. If anyone hasn't watched Alison Ravenhall's Don't Believe the Hype, it talks about that need to really, check like almost, first of all, something can say it's accessible, but sometimes that standard, how accessible is sometimes in question. So using all those other methods, whether it's checking yourself or having a look at some of the comments or the crowdsourced, feedback on, those media players or any other of those third-party products, is really, really important. Unfortunately, we can't just take things at face value often. So that's really good. So a question has come in from Paul. I think this one is open to everyone, and it is a bit of actually probably crosses over between a WCAG and a design question. So, but I know we've got lots of expertise on the call. So this question actually relates to visible focus indicators. And the question is there a baseline on how visible, quote unquote, they need to be? So Paul said that is where that the color contrast needs to be sufficient to comply with our criteria 1.4.11 non-text contrast. That's one of our WCAG 2.1 ones. But how do we handle cases where color contrast is enough? So black on white, but the focus style is just a thin black line. Is there any info on this? Anyone have a thought about that one? If not, I can. Russ, go ahead. Oh, mute again.
Failed twice now. I was going to say I'd love to hear from Steve, because Steve mentioned this as one of his passions. So I'd like to throw a few. One of the things we found is choosing a different namespace in a way that if you're using a border already, choosing an outline for focus is a really good thing, because then you're not clashing with something that's already there. And if you've got a radio button or a checkbox, if you have a checked state, make sure the focus state is a different, we call it like a namespace or a visual space. So it's never clashing, because you need to be aware that you will have a checked and a checked focus state. And those sort of things are really important. So that's one thing that I've learned over the years, is to make sure it's a different space. But I'm holding the limelight. Steve.
Yeah, you're welcome to the limes. But something that I've done with a couple of teams recently is to be a bit cheeky and to look ahead to WCAG 2.2. I'm going to paste the link in the chat. Hopefully I've pasted it in the right place. And because that actually does go into a bit more detail about, like, more specifically, like, okay, what do we really mean by a visible indicator? And it even kind of delves into what feels like slightly weird mathematical formula, like it must be this long, but only on this side. And 3 pixels is fine, but not if it's only on the left, and this kind of thing. So I've been kind of looking back to there. And even in some places where the towing the line for accessibility has been more about compliance than about usability, you can still kind of get the right angle on it, because it's like, well, it's going to be compliance problem soon, so why don't we get ahead of that? I admittedly, all of those things in that focus appearance in the 2.2, I found very confusing for about a couple of days, possibly a couple of weeks. But I feel like I might understand it now. Don't ask me to explain it, please. But I feel like I might understand it now.
So it's funny you say that, Steve, because in my team, we do a weekly deep dive into a WCAG criteria, and this one was actually ours on Wednesday. And we did the same. It's actually, it's a little bit of a convoluted one, that is for sure. I think it can be probably summarized as, they have this complex algorithm for minimum number of pixels. And I have to say, it really is minimum. It's a bit like our contrast ratio, where we want to say that's the absolute minimum. I actually think that it's still probably not the best experience, but, WCAG being WCAG, it is measurable. And then second part is how well it contrasts between the focused and the unfocused state. And then the third part is how well the outline contrasts with the component itself. So when it is focused. So yeah, we definitely, it's more than we currently have with the WCAG 2.0 focus visible criteria, which even though it's possibly going to be moved to a different level, or it was moved to a different level, I should say, it's still very ambiguous. But yeah, something's better than nothing, but let's go for the best practice. Let's make it clearly visible. All right, so that's our question there. Now back to Jonathan's question. So he's provided a bit more context for this one. So Jonathan has said, we're using SMS for our primary communication with our clients and workforce, and they have an automated solution for some of their messages. The organization is in the aged care sector, so they need to basically make this accessible for different people with potentially wide-ranging tech savviness and also disability. And they also use phone calls, but that's all manual. So I don't know whether anyone has any more insights around that from a SMS sort of point of view. If not, we can definitely take that one offline and maybe pop it into the Slack channel as something that perhaps others might have some views on. Wonderful. All right. So we've got about 10 minutes to go. So if you do have that burning question that you've been sitting on, now's probably the time to either shoot it through the Q&A or pop your hand up with the raise hand feature. So one of the things, Steve, you've actually talked a lot about ARIA and the like, but we haven't really delved into the automated testing tool side of things. Actually, your presentation was really clear. As someone who's not really in that space, I found it, really insightful. What are some of, I guess, the benefits that you have seen in implementing Jest Acts in either your current organisation or previous organisations? What are some of those benefits you've seen from an automated testing tool that's integrated like this?
Thanks. I think one of the most interesting and probably the funnest is something not codey, it's something cultural, that once people start seeing Jest Acts or something like it included in the automated tests, it kind of bubbles up that awareness of accessibility to more people, especially when you've got a mix of developer roles. There's some front-end developers maybe and some full stack developers. When you get them looking at the front-end code, going like, oh, what's that? It's often a chance to kind of start a conversation about, well, here's some important bits about the UI that you may or may not have thought about before. So that's probably my favorite thing about the automated testing. It's good at starting wider conversations about it.
Fantastic. And how do you go about, unfortunately, some people see an automated testing tool as, if it passes all the rules, and you address this perfectly in your presentation by calling out manual testing, assistive technology testing, usability testing with people with disability. And I guess, we who live and breathe this stuff, we know all that, but so often we still find people think, automated testing tool, it's passed, it's accessible. How do you reinforce how automated testing sort of fits into, that broader, that this is not the silver bullet for, testing, even if it is against WCAG? And I might start with you, Steve, but more than happy if anyone else would like to add to the answer to that, to pop your hand up.
That's an excellent question, and one that I think is not easy to answer. But I think it depends. My favorite answer. It depends a little bit on who I'm talking to. So one thing that I've done before, which I've had mixed to medium success with, is to kind of find an analogy with other kinds of unit testing. And one of my favorite ones is to think about going off the happy path. Cool, we've tested what happens when everything in the UI goes perfectly, but what happens when things go wrong, or incorrect format data is put into a field, or that kind of thing. So often a testing suite will be covering that kind of thing quite well. Like it'll cover 5 or 6 weird cases of something going a bit wonky. So I kind of try and take that approach of like, well, we don't want to do just one test for the accessibility stuff. I mean, we can, but people are going to interact with it in lots of different ways with lots of different tech. So we probably want to go a little bit wider and not just do the one tiny automated test, but a little bit of extra stuff as well. I'm not sure if I actually answered the question.
No, that's absolutely. And I guess, it's definitely different approaches when you're talking to different people. Yeah. Has anyone else sort of tackled this in their organization where, automated testing is great. It sort of picks up a whole lot, but, how do you make sure that people know that, accessibility is much, much more than that. And even testing against WCAG is much, much more than just what an automated tool can test. Any other thoughts, or have you tackled that in your organizations or with people you work with? Sumner, yes.
I hear this so often. I especially hear it from people who are brand new to accessibility. They still don't know what they don't know. And the learning that has to come from that. And I find that I really have to stop and be patient when what I want, my reaction might not be that initially. It's like, wait, how could you do that? What I have done is I ask what tool they use, and there's a couple of very popular ones. And so I will then take them to the website of that tool and look at the terms of that tool and see where the developer of that tool has actually stated, do not rely upon just this tool. We're only going to get 30 to 40%. and we're only going to get what our algorithm. And so they don't want to hear it from me, but maybe they'll hear it from or read it or in some way accept part of that when it's coming from the actual website that they got that tool from or what they're using it from. But I think it's a real education. My first response is, yay, they're doing something. So now that you've decided that you're going to do something, what can we do to educate you on how to do more? And I know that most people use these tools because they're easy and they're simple. And you've already heard me talk about how I like things that are simple. But it's the same thing. I don't like to have to redo something I've already done. So if I relied upon one of these tools and it didn't catch something that needed to be fixed or shouldn't have been done in the first place, I'm duplicating my efforts and my time. And that I really don't want to do. So I try to bring it around when I'm talking to someone is what is it they want to accomplish? And it's usually get an answer in the shortest amount of time. So how can I then show them how to do just that so they can learn a better way that they can take to the next time and the next time and the next time?
Yeah, absolutely. And back over to you, Steve.
Thanks. So everyone is very busy, right? I'm sure everyone has this feeling most of the time. So one thing I try to be wary of is saying, cool, you're doing this automated testing. Now I've got this giant sack full of instructions for doing manual testing as well. That for some reason that never goes down well. So what I like to try and do is find a tiny thing that we can do that's not unit testing. So for manual testing, like Alicia was saying earlier, I think keyboard testing, it's a great kind of low effort, high value thing to do. Or zooming, the command or control plus. That is such a quick and easy thing to do. And if there are any big problems, you see them very quickly. You get that experience. So that's another angle, is to try and find something tiny as a kind of inroads to doing more stuff.
Yeah, that's a great one, Steve. And I think you can also then slowly introduce things over time. It's sort of not like, the proverbial, drinking from the fire hose, where we often try and go, oh, here's everything you need to do, at once. And, unfortunately, as an organization who offers training, that's what people usually want. They're like, oh, just come in, do a day's training, and done. But really, if we could introduce little things over time, bed them in, not have that cognitive overload as well, and not have that feeling of, oh my gosh, this is just adding to my workload, which is often the response you get, even though we're like passionate about it, know the importance for everyone else. It's sometimes a bit harder to learn something new. Well, look, on that note, we are actually coming up to the end of our session. So I wanted to thank our presenters who have joined us today, Sumner, Steve, Russ, Ani, Ashton, and Alicia, who dashed off a few minutes ago. Thank you so much for both sharing your knowledge via your presentations that you recorded, and then, of course, joining us today for this live Q&A. Thank you also to everyone who joined us also for the live Q&A, for all the questions that you sent through. That was fantastic. And once again, I'll give a bit of a shout out to our sponsors, because we can't do this without them. So that's Telstra, Intopia, ANZ, Coles, and How To. So with that, it brings us to the end of our official camp. Thank you all very much, and look out for some details for next year. As I said, we hope to be back in person, hopefully actually hybrid, so we can have more people join us remotely as well. So until next year though, thank you. See you later. Bye.
A11y Camp 2021.